It's hard to talk about the last 10 years of video games without mentioning all the downs, and believe me, there were a lot of those, but this time around, instead of mulling over the terrible parts, I want to just tell you about some good-ass games I think you should play. We're gonna break this list up into 3 parts. My honorable mentions, my top 20 starting from 20 to 11, and my top 10. I want to make it clear that as we get closer to the next video as well as the list, the leap between something like game number 11 in the second video and game number 10 in my top 10 video is going to be a pretty big jump. They're not going to be as comparable. We'll start with my honorable mentions. Games that I feel didn't make the list, but are still worthy of playing, maybe even twice. Followed by games 20 to 11, games that stood out to me that I really enjoyed and would love to play again sometime soon. And, of course, finally my top 10, which comes close to some of my favorite games of all time. For honorable mentions, think of them as hard recommendations and games that would probably make it to a top 10 or 5 list in their year of release, with some caveats and exceptions. So let's get started. Here are my honorable mentions in no particular order for the past decade. Spec Ops: The Line doesn't make my top 20 because you'd have to be a masochist to actually enjoy it. When I first completed the game, I wanted to take a hot shower and cry. It's downright depressing and even nihilistic at times in its subject matter, and it really pulls it off to create a great game, albeit not a very enjoyable one because in addition to being pretty depressing, as far as shooters go, the mechanics are pretty bog standard with a few exceptions here and there. Gunplay isn't great either, but that's not the point of the game. It's designed to make you feel uncomfortable with a very generic military shooter thinly layered over it to hide its true intentions. The devil is in the details here. Throughout your playthrough, the main protagonist you play as, Walker, gets more agitated throughout the story as you and your squad pretty much go through hell. Your character physically gets dirtier with blood and sand sticking to your skin. Your character goes from calling out commands to your squad to angrily shouting them. I can't really talk about this game more without spoiling it, so I'm just going to leave it at that. It's something you gotta play for yourself. It's an amazing game. Terraria. Sandbox games aren't my cup of tea. I need an objective or a goal to work towards that the designers have painstakingly built the game around, making sure the game is paced out accordingly so you never get bored on your way to that goal. Sandbox games are more or less the opposite of this part of game design, but Terraria is an exception. For one, I do like it, and two, there is a lot of endgame content that is worth getting into and playing. When you first start the game, there's not a whole lot going on. It's recommended to read a wiki even to help you get started, or maybe watch a Let's Play on YouTube to get motivated, especially if you're alone. But once you get into it, you'll find those goals, how far you can dig, fighting the bosses, unlocking a new part of the world to explore, or transforming the one you're already in. There is so much content in this game now compared to at launch, but even the vanilla version had a lot going for it. There's tons of crafting, a fun combat system, world-changing events. The gameplay can be a bit tedious at the beginning, but if you stick with it or play with a friend, you'll find some gems underneath all those rocks. Rainbow Six Siege and Battlefield 1. Finally, some multiplayer shooters I can enjoy and sink some hours into. They would have easily made the top 20, but Jesus, the launch of Siege and the lack of content in Battlefield 1 was bad. Thankfully, the games have received a lot of support post-launch, and the expansion to Battlefield 1 got super cheap over time, and it's added a ton of value to it. I really enjoy both of these games for what they do. Siege being a fun online tactical shooter that throws itself into the hands of the community in terms of what kind of experience you will get. And believe me, you'll get some interesting ones.
Where the fuck is the backup? Are you retarded?
Kill yourself.
You fucking kill yourself, asshole.
Why do you sound like that? Yo, you foreign or something?
Where's the fucking backup, you fucking fast?
The backup is heading towards your house right now because you're getting slaughtered, kid.
True, buddy.
Enjoy when the FBI kicks down your door for cyberbullying.
Battlefield 1, while I feel dumbs down the series a bit, was extremely fun. Nothing beats running around as a medic, pretending to be Andrew Garfield from Hacksaw Ridge, reviving your squad mates, but in World War I. The player base of Battlefield 1 has shrunk significantly, but I can still find a match, and Siege's queue times are impressively low considering the game came out earlier this decade. Kid Icarus Uprising. This was a really cool game. It was quite ambitious for a handheld and had a ton of memorable levels and characters. It's basically a third-person shooter, plus a rail shooter on top of that. One of the bigger hurdles is the controls, unfortunately. There's just no comfortable way to play this game, even with the Circle Pad Pro. You pretty much need to use the stylus when playing on your 3DS. The game even came with a fucking piece of fold-out plastic to let you hold it better. But if you can get used to the controls, which you eventually do, you'll find an amazing game with tons of love and attention put into it. There is just so much to like about this game. The gameplay is solid, the music is great, the characters are funny and well written. Also, Palutena for Nintendo Waifu of the Decade, sue me, fight me on the side of the street. Brutal Legend. Technically, this game came out in December of 2009 for consoles, but the PC version did come out this decade, so I'd say that's good enough. That, and I've basically bought it twice now. That should tell you how much I like this game. It's an open-world game with an art direction that seemingly nicks every single metal band album cover from the early 80s to the mid-90s, from Iron Maiden to Judas Priest to Dio. Mix in some comedy and some top-tier voice acting, as well as Jack Black lending his voice to the main character, Eddie Riggs, and you've got one of the most unique games of the decade. This game almost by itself got me into the metal genre of music. The game has a massive soundtrack of great licensed tunes, as well as original music to listen to while you're hacking and slashing away at enemies, exploring its vast world in the upgradable car, or flying around commanding troops in the RTS segments. It's a real jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none game. It's got a lot going on for it. It doesn't do one thing really exceptional in terms of gameplay, but everything else is really solid enough, and the variety keeps everything fresh and interesting, especially with its great story and mostly likable characters. I just wish that it was easier to replace story segments without having to start a brand new game. It needed a new game plus. The other problem is the delivery of the world's lore. If you don't find these lore dump cutscenes on the map, you're going to be lost near the end of the story when characters start explaining stuff that your character understands but you seemingly don't. But it's still thoroughly entertaining, and there will be something for you to like here. A Hat in Time. Finally, a good 3D platformer akin to something like Super Mario Sunshine or Jak and Daxter. It's more like the former, and it's arguably better paced than Sunshine. A Hat in Time shines with its unique levels, fun story, and characters, and an unexpectedly splendid co-op mode. The whole game is just really entertaining from start to finish. It doesn't have the best level design I've seen, and the worlds are kind of small, but for a lower budget Kickstarter game, it's still pretty impressive, especially when you consider all the updates put into the game, like the level editor for user-made content and the local co-op mode. The game also packs a lot of charm. Similar to Jak and Daxter, you have a cast of characters that are fun and interesting, except I'd argue here that they're even more memorable in some regards. Characters like Snatcher or the filmmaker Birds are just excellent through both the dialogue and voice work. The game comes close to AAA production quality in this regard, and it really enhances the overall experience. It's one of those games where I never wanted it to end. Transformers: Fall of Cybertron. What truly sucks about this game is that unless Activision can get the Transformers license back from Hasbro, we may never be able to buy a digital copy of this game again. It's been taken down from Steam along with the other Transformers games. Its predecessor, War for Cybertron, came out earlier this decade, and it was a fun game, but Fall of Cybertron is where the series started to hit its stride. One thing it does really well is pacing and nostalgia. If you're a fan of any of the Transformers media, you'll enjoy what's here, even if it's more Generation 1 and you're unfamiliar with it. And when you're progressing, it's always changing things up to keep your interest. Unlike War for Cybertron, with its evil and good campaigns, here it's just one campaign where you go back and forth between Autobots and Decepticons, using different characters with different playstyles. Even if you're not familiar with G1 Transformers like I am, and maybe only saw, one of the newer shows on TV at one point, or just the Michael Bay movies, it's still great to play because the game's universe just grabs your attention with its simple ideas. It's giant alien robots that transform into vehicles. What's not to get excited about? Deus Ex Human Revolution, Prey 2017, and Deus Ex Mankind Divided. The new generation of RPG shooters came and went, and honestly, they were pretty decent, but the better the gameplay got, the more problems they had. Human Revolution was a pretty fun game, but the gunplay was pretty terrible in all honesty. The story wasn't very interesting, but it was at least worth a second playthrough with the Director's Cut version, which fixed a lot of the problems with the original, including the awful boss fights. It was still a fun game, and I played it all the way through almost twice with 2 different playstyles. Prey tried for a more interesting setting, and for the most part succeeded with much better gameplay than Human Revolution overall, but it dropped the dialogue options in favor of a silent protagonist, focusing on a stronger upgrade system which kind of fizzled out halfway through the game. Unfortunately, the game had no shortage of story issues as well, just like Human Revolution. The ending is considered to be awful. The gunplay itself, once again, is pretty lackluster. Enemies sometimes take way too much ammo for you to kill, and after you kill a boss, you just don't feel like you're getting rewarded for wasting all of that ammo. You can't even aim down sights, so forget being careful with every shot. You're gonna waste ammo unless you're right up in front of their faces, and guess what? Your character is super weak, and the enemies are melee, so if you get up in their faces, they're gonna kill you. You're not a super soldier, you're a scientist. And that would seem cool for an RPG, but this is a first-person shooter, so the game kind of clashes with itself. You've also got some pretty terrible waypoint navigation that starts to creep in several hours into the game. Wrapping it up, we have Deus Ex Mankind Divided, and this one hurts the hardest of the bunch. As I said, the games just run into more and more problems as the core gameplay gets better, and Mankind Divided is the best and worst of the lot. The game is practically unfinished, loading times are way too damn long, there's tons of performance issues still, and the ending is actually unfinished from what I've read. Despite this, the core gameplay, when it's not bugging out, when the game works as it should, it comes close to those older RPGs from the early 2000s, where you not only have choice through dialogue options, but in the gameplay of how you approach each of your situations. The problem is that you just have a poor understanding of what to do for some missions, and you can't just get the results you want, meaning it's sometimes easier to just gun everyone down. When it comes to the 3D Western RPGs, the early 2000s with KOTOR 2, Bloodlines, and even the original Deus Ex have all these in one way or another beat despite their own issues for the time. They have much better writing and player choice overall compared to any of the games I listed. Still, these 3 games are really fun, and I do want to give each of them another shot or another playthrough. The Witcher 3. This is probably a game you expected on my top 10, or at least top 20. I mean, how could you not put Witcher 3 in your best game of the decade? And you know what? It could have been, but I never finished it, and I just think the combat isn't up to snuff sometimes. In fact, I think it's sometimes kind of terrible. But it doesn't matter, because Witcher 3 outclasses so many open-world games with an interesting world to explore, full of content that's, you know, it's easy to recommend for that reason alone. The voiceover performances are very entertaining, and it's pretty cool to see some of your choices carry over from previous games, as well as what you do in this one. My only problem is that depending on what choices you picked in your previous 2 games, you might actually end up getting less content out of it. There are choices that you can do in those games that give you nothing in this one. I actually loaded the wrong version of my Witcher 2 save. There's an auto-save and a quick save or something like that, and apparently I didn't get my ending from Witcher 2, and that kind of discouraged me from playing it, you know, Witcher 3. There's also some story disparity. I've read The Last Wish, played all of 2 and part of 1, yet I feel incredibly disconnected from like half the cast of the main characters in this game. Characters from the previous games, like King Foltest from Witcher 2, were just more memorable than whoever the Baron was that I helped out here. What Witcher 3 does right in an open world game are the side quests. They're not like Bethesda games where they just feel like chores. They have a proper beginning, middle, and end. Some of the side quests in this game beat out main quests from other AAA open world games. And that's where I feel the strength from Witcher 3 comes from, and why people always recommend it and play it. It's because a lot of the quests in this game are really cool and interesting. Civilization V Gold Edition. And I really gotta emphasize the gold in this edition, because had this been the launch version, I would not even think of putting this game in the honorable mentions. This game took a very long time and 2 major expansions to get to where it is, and it is, as of right now, very good. You have a lot of depth to it, despite it being a pretty much, you know, very casual 4X strategy game, turn-based. It's a really fun game, and it's really, really fun to play with friends. I would have put this in my top 20 had it been like this from the start. And the other thing is that you really got to play this game with friends. You can play it by yourself to relax, but with friends is the way to go, especially to really piss them off. You know, have these rage sessions screaming at your friends over, you know, getting nuked or them, you know, encroaching on your territory and stealing your profits or generals. There's just so much shit flinging in this game. It's really fun. You know, 10 hours of one game can culminate into just this autistic spurg-out moment. I'm off the script right now, so I'll just kind of wrap it up here. This is a really fun game if you get it with the expansions and you play it with some friends. It's some of the most amount of fun I've had in a very long time. Doom! Otherwise known as Doom 2016. I would have finished this game if my save didn't get corrupted. I think it's a fantastic shooter though, but it suffers from some pacing issues. After some time playing it, you kind of see all there is to see, at least from what I've played, and you end up fighting a lot of the same enemies over and over again with a lot of the same guns. The music is kick-ass and the gunplay is really fun, but the glory kill system gets a bit tiring, having to kill demons by doing a contextual finishing move that shows you the same animations over and over again. Can really interrupt the flow of the gameplay. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Darksiders actually managed to do it better. Still, the shooting combined with platforming is a great idea, and the demons are fun to fight. I'm actually getting excited for the sequel just talking about this game. Fire Emblem Three Houses. I have mixed opinions with SRPGs. There are some really fun ones, but oftentimes they are littered with frustrating moments like awful mandatory objectives. The optimum way to play these games is usually to have permadeath for your characters turned on. But that can be frustrating when one of your characters gets criticaled out of nowhere, forcing you to take less risks so you won't be restarting entire levels. Three Houses fixes all of that. It removes a ton of terrible escort quests and RNG-based difficulty that would be in other games, like Jeanne d'Arc, in favor of a more streamlined experience. It does still fall into the SRPG trap of the game being hard at the beginning and easier later on, because you don't have a lot of tactics to utilize at the beginning of the game. Furthermore, aside from the pre-game setup, you have a very paper-thin level of depth to the tactics. As for the story, some characters do take a while to get going, but I did care enough about them to keep them all alive by the end of my playthrough. And there's some cool story twists throughout the game. It's got some replayability thanks to the other paths at the beginning of the game, New Game Plus, and it's very well paced. Most games like this try to shoot for 60 or 70 hours with tons of padding, but this game made use of its 50 or so hours I got out of it with tighter knit battles, character interactions, and more impressively, fully voiced dialogue. If there was one thing that bothered me about this game, it's that it does not have a single 10 out of 10 perfect moment throughout the 50 hours I played it. It often plays it way too safe, shackling itself to its T rating a bit too hard, and not taking risks. Meanwhile, spiritual successors like Vestaria Saga, which just got translated to English on Steam, aren't afraid to talk about darker subjects and themes. Despite all of this, Three Houses remains a consistently well-executed experience throughout the entire time playing it, minus the times when you miss 4 attacks in a row and the enemy criticals you. That's always fun! Everspace. Everspace has a bit of a learning curve to its controls, but once you get into it, man, it's amazing. It's like an action-oriented FTL, faster than light. It's got full voice acting, an interesting story, and some of the best space combat I've played in ages. Seriously, I stopped listening to the in-game soundtrack and just put on Eurobeat, leveled up my ship speed and energy to the highest it can go, and went on a space-drifting initial D-style adventure. To be honest, I probably could finish the entire story anytime I wanted to because I have nearly fully upgraded the ship, but I haven't taken the time to do it because I would have to play on normal easy to beat the game, but right now I like to play on the hardest difficulty because it rewards the most amount of credits and you fight more larger ships, which is always a blast. And you also have different factions that fight each other too, so it's always nice starting a war. Oh, you got a big capital ship over here, one over here, one over here. Let's get them all to fight each other and then kill them all and then loot their bodies. It's fucked up, but it's amazing, and you should play it. The only reason, again, why it's not in my bottom 20, my top 20, my top 10, whatever, is because I didn't finish it. Bruges. Hell yeah, dude. This game is awesome. It really flew under the radar. It's one of the few RTS games that came out this decade from a AAA publisher with production quality to match. It's one of the few games that made me feel like a bona fide commander in a strategy game, partially due to the game's aesthetic and scalability. The story is actually not too bad. It's a bit generic, but the performances are pretty good, and I enjoy that an RTS has scripted scenarios and varied gameplay for its campaign, rather than just some lazy skirmish maps thrown in. The game was unfortunately taken off digital platforms because Ubisoft let the licenses within it expire. The developer behind it is still working on games similar to it, but they're much more hardcore. Nothing they've made that I've seen has quite beat Bruges for its pick-up-and-play ease of use and high production value. Heroes of the Storm. I played a lot of Dota 2 at the beginning of the decade, but haven't jumped back into it in a while, and honestly, I can barely remember most of my experiences with it. It's also a different game now. I haven't even touched it proper in like 7 years. I've been playing MOBAs since Warcraft 3, and I just wanted a more recognizable game, with a bit more going on in each map. Something easy to learn, something that I know I'd like, and Heroes of the Storm ended up being that game, and it was pretty great for a while with all the support it got. It's more of a casual game, sure, but it has depth to it. It can get really goddamn frustrating, but it's a lot easier to deal with someone who sucks in Heroes than someone in League. Also, the community, while it is a MOBA, isn't nearly as shitty as League or Dota 2. It has changed over the last few years since I've played it, and it's past its glory days in terms of both player count and in terms of it just sometimes getting worse over time. It misses my top 20 for having way too expensive microtransactions. Seriously, $10 for a hero? Are you on crack? They also removed the ability to get characters at a good price by removing the 2,000 gold reward for doing the weekly brawl, and coincidentally, whenever a new assassin hero was released, it would be the top tier character for weeks before it got nerfed. Funny that for those first 2 weeks or so, the characters would cost 15,000 gold, but then would drop to the typical 10,000 gold hero price after all the nerfs came out. You know what I'm implying here, and let's be honest, Blizzard has done much worse. The game itself has also fallen more to the wayside. It used to be talked about all the time, getting a new major update every month, but its moment of glory is gone. It doesn't get those updates anymore, unfortunately. Still a fun game, still has a player base though. FTL Faster Than Life. This is an amazing independently made game. It got a Kickstarter, got a ton of money, and it got a ton of content over time with an amazing expansion. I would have put this in my top 20, but I had to bump it off for a much more fun game, because this game, while fun, is extremely frustrating at times. You just can't control what's going to happen to you. And I think a lot of people are going to like that, and a lot of people are going to hate that. You can go sectors to sector, getting amazing upgrades for your ship, only to get fucked in the ass at the end of the game by the final boss, which is just so brokenly overpowered that it makes you want to smash your keyboard. I got to the final boss several times, and I kept dying, so at one point I said, fuck this is good enough, I'm gonna save scum this until I win. And that was on the easy difficulty. There's a normal and a hard one, holy hell! And I tried playing on normal, it's insane. You pretty much have to look at a wiki for some of these encounters, because things like upgrading your medical station, which you'd never guess to be useful, end up being super important. But you wouldn't know that without trial and error, and that's the nature of this genre, and that's fine, but Jesus Christ, can this game get fucking frustrating? But other than that, it's a really cool game. I highly recommend playing it on easy mode at least. I have over about 30 hours in it, and it's been really, a really cool ride, but man, fuck this difficulty. Fuck this game. Persona 5. This will be my last honorable mention. I have a lot to say about it. Honestly, I felt the pacing in this game was horrible. This game is about 100 hours long, not counting all the side content, and it easily could have been 20 or 30 hours shorter. There's just so much padding put into this game when it didn't need it. Some of the dungeons just go on forever, and there's so many unskippable cutscenes and scripted sequences that are peppered throughout the game that add nothing to it. Like how a cutscene needs to show you for 10 tedious seconds that 3 separate lights that you activated on a switch are turning off, and it has to show you each one even though you're notified in every way on the map and told by your companions that you in fact did turn those lights off. Or how every in-game day you get walls of text messages from your companions just regurgitating the same events and plot points over and over again. I know they're trying to remind me of what's going on in the story and keep me pumped up, but it feels like the game treats you like an idiot with characters constantly restating the obvious over and over again. Another problem is the menu system. It's actually presented well, but it feels like I'm in the menus more than I'm actually playing the game. No other RPG has made me feel that way. I just feel like I'm always tweaking stats, and if I wanted to look at stats and spreadsheets this much, I'd play EVE and make actual money. Even though the dungeons are arguably a step up from Persona 3 and 4's randomly generated hallways, most dungeons weren't that great either. They have good themes that relate to the story with plenty of character interactions wheeling over them, but there are no new mechanics to take advantage of them, aside from press X to hide or press X to automatically jump to this location while occasionally having to time it. As a side note, having all these actions on one button made the game a lot more frustrating for me than it should have been. There are times when I'm about to jump an enemy, but they get out of range, so I end up hitting the button, falling out of cover, and getting attacked by another guy. And if he manages to exploit your party's weakness, he can combo the shit out of you. Depending on what enemy you're fighting and your levels plus health, you can accidentally start a fight and be dead before you can hit another button, because if your protagonist dies, you lose the game and you have to reload a save. It's unbelievably frustrating, all because the X button has to do 2 different things when it could have easily been any of the other buttons on the controller. Having the game be an RPG platformer would have alleviated a lot of the battle fatigue that I have had with this game, because there's just so many battles in this game. It would have been amazing to see platforming in these different dungeons, and it would have made the dungeons 100 times more interesting, and it's baffling they decided against it. They could have had these sections to break up the combat, but instead, platforming that is there just feels like some glorified QTE. The voiceover content was obviously cut down heavily outside the main story, much like the previous games, which frustrates the hell out of me when I'm hearing a character talk to me, and then all of a sudden he's just making grunting noises. It just feels lazy. I don't want to hear excuses that voice acting is expensive. I know it is, but when you look at games like Fire Emblem Three Houses, which have an even bigger voice cast, and it's still fully voiced outside a few text boxes for quests, it's still more comprehensive. And even though Persona 5 has some good twists and some decent waifus, Persona 4 and 3 I felt had better subject matter that made for a more compelling story that overtook the performances and direction that P5's story and characters had. It always feels like the initial releases of the last 3 Persona games feel like early adopter versions of the more complete, enhanced editions that come out later, like Fez, Portable, Golden, and now Royale. It sounds like I hate this game, but I don't. I think it's a great game. Perfect at points. The first 20 hours were really fun, and there were dungeons that I liked beyond that. I wanted to unlock all the neat combat mechanics through the confidence system, which now give more purpose towards interacting with characters outside the main story, besides the fun little stories and dialogue these characters already have. The writing for the side characters outside your crew this time around is top-notch for the most part. In fact, I think it's the best in the series. I enjoy doing these confidence more than the actual core gameplay, which is why I stuck with it even after dropping it for months at a time. And it paid off because the story has some good twists that are worth sticking it out for. I might give it another playthrough for Royale if it ever comes to PC, but that's doubtful. By the way, Hifumi Togo for Waifu of the Decade, fight me on the side of the street if you disagree. Tei is a second. Kawakami is also for gentlemen of refined taste. Every other option is trash. So those are my honorable mentions. Yeah, there's a lot of them, but it's 10 years of video games. What are you gonna do? Thank you for tuning in. If you've stayed around for this long, I will have the bottom 20 and top 10 soon. I don't know when. This video took a very, very, very long time to make. The next video shouldn't take as long because I have a better idea of what I'm gonna do for them, and also, I'm only doing 10 games per video. This was what, like 15 plus? Jesus. But yeah, thank you for watching, and it would mean a lot to me if you left some comments, hit the like button, helps out the channel, or check out the affiliate links if you want to buy shit online, buy any of these games. It does help out the show a lot. Money's always nice. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. I'm out.